Hey, what's up? My name's JM Chaley and welcome to my channel. This week I want to talk about interludes. Interludes are a part of a story that could be considered fluff or maybe even filler. They don't advance the story forward, but they're these little side scenes that take place sort of out and away from the rest of the story. And yes, they could be removed and you wouldn't lose any content or meaning in the overall story itself. They don't contribute to the main story or any side plots or anything like that. But they add a feeling of depth and breadth to your world building and your overall immersion experience for your reader, if done right. So let's talk about interludes, the different examples of what they can be, the different kinds, and figure out for yourself if this is something you would ever include in one of your stories. So without further ado, let's get into kind of the first example of an interlude, which happens to be the first time I ever came across one, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'm like, oh, this is kind of a neat storytelling tool, and I'm sure they've existed long before this book came around. But it was the first time I'd ever seen one. And it was the Aftermath series by Chuck Wendig. Now, the Aftermath series is a trilogy of books. They're Star Wars books that take place, I want to say, a year or so, maybe even 5 years after Return of the Jedi, which is interesting because it's the same time period that like The Mandalorian and all these new Disney Plus series take place, but these books came out before all those series were created. But anyway, the interlude that we would occasionally be hit with were focused on the original heroes of the Star Wars trilogy. Han Solo, for example, right? Now, the Aftermath series followed a new group of heroes. All new folks, right? Got a new cast of characters. We didn't see them in the movies. You may have seen references to some of them in the Clone Wars series if you saw them, but that is about it. They had no connection to the original heroes. Like you don't see like new hero talking to Princess Leia or Lando or Han, right? But suddenly you'd be hit with this interlude, and you'd find out in the middle of this whole plot of what the new characters are doing. They're like, interlude. Han Solo, meanwhile, is over here doing this other thing. Has nothing to do with this story. But you as the reader, if you're a Star Wars fan, because I'm assuming you're a Star Wars fan if you're reading this book, you're like, Han Solo, excellent, I love this guy, right? So you're drawn in. So the interlude wins. It's a successful interlude because you give a crap about Han Solo. You're like, oh yeah, I want to know more about this. You're kind of thinking, geez, I wish I had a whole book on this guy. So I loved those interludes. I didn't mind being pulled away from the main story for a little while to check in with a beloved character. So it was a great use of an interlude. And this, I think, would be a tough one if you're an author trying to pull off something like this, because do you have, a roster of characters in the same universe as the universe you're writing in, but you're not writing about these guys. You're writing about, right? You'd almost have to have this entire world set up with all these different characters, a fan base that knows about all of them, right? So it's a tough one to pull off, but for Star Wars, it was fertile ground, right? But it's a great example of an interlude. Another example of an interlude was used recently in Winter Lost by Patricia Briggs, and it's part of the Mercy Thompson series. It's her latest, as of this recording, which is October of 2024. It's the latest book in the Mercy Thompson series. And I'm not sure, I think this is the first time that she's used interludes. This was different. So you have the main story with Mercy Thompson doing all the Mercy Thompson things in the main storyline. And then suddenly, interlude, where she focuses on a different member of the pack. Mercy Thompson's a were-coyote, and she hangs out with werewolves, right? So this focuses on this werewolf over here. The success of this interlude really depended on how much you gave a crap about this particular werewolf, I think. Because you're over here being immersed and pulled into this great story, and then you're being pulled away and shown what's happening with this other character. Now, it's similar to the example I gave before, where you're focusing on, like, right, you have the main characters over here, and then boop, you're over here at Han Solo. But this side character in the Mercy Thompson series doesn't have the same weight as a Han Solo. This guy is relatively new. You don't really know about him. He doesn't have the fan base, right? So it didn't have the same impact. I found myself thinking, okay, yeah, I mean, I like this guy, but please get back to the main story. It's tough when you're pulling off that kind of a, hey, we're talking about these characters over here, now we're going to talk about this guy. Unless you've got a strong readership for this guy over here, that's a tough interlude to sell, right? Which brings me to the third example. And this is the final book in the Ink and Sigil trilogy by Kevin Hearn. And it's Candle and Crow. And there's interludes. Now, he's done interludes before in this series, Kevin Hearn. But they always kind of focus on the same thing. And this is this is a different example, a different way to do interludes than the other two. The first two were pretty much similar, because you're being pulled away from the main character to talk about some other character. In this one, you're staying with the main character, but the main character is doing something that doesn't impact the story. So I'll give the example. In the Ink and Sigil series, you're following the adventures of Al McVarish, and he is a sigil agent. So he uses specialized inks to create these sigils that have magical effects. Very cool series. It's in the same universe as the Iron Druid. If you like Kevin Hearn, if you like the Iron Druid series, check it out. But that's kind of the premise. He's a sigil agent, uses magical inks to make magical sigils. Every now and then he'll do an interlude talking about the crazy ingredients he has to go to find to make these inks, these magical inks. And these ingredients are like, you know, like the dust from a moth's wing and stuff like that. Like one time he went into a whole deal about how he had to find tardigrades, you know, water bears, if you're familiar with the kind of microscopic little 6-legged or 8-legged little microscopic creatures, right? And he had to find all these little tardigrades, and he had to keep them alive long enough to dissolve into the ink and all this kind of stuff. And it had nothing to do with the story. You could have skipped the whole thing and not lost any mileage on that story or context in the story whatsoever. But it adds this flavor to the world. It does more world building. It shows what's going on and brings more depth. Same thing, the interludes in Mercy Thompson series did the same thing, because there's this whole like kind of disaster going on, and it's impacting the main characters, and she's showing how this disaster is affecting this side character. Same thing in Aftermath, right? There's the whole fallout after the Empire falls. The main characters are dealing with it. The interlude shows how Han Solo is dealing with it. So it's in the same theme, the same overall setting, but it's not with the main characters. So those are 3 examples of interludes. And, you know, I think they might be a risk. So it's up to you if you want to put them in your book or not. If you have those kind of opportunities, they're really cool. And the payoff could be a lot of fun for your readers, but you might also lose the reader for a couple of pages if it's not done right. Which brings me to the criteria of a successful interlude. So the first thing an interlude needs to be is short. This should only be like a couple of pages, real short, a page or two, really short. The second thing it needs to be in line with the genre of your book, of course, right? You don't want to really pivot too hard into some other genre and really lose your reader and confuse them. And it needs to be in line with the same theme. So if your book is funny, your interlude should be funny too. If your book is gritty and edge of your seat tense, your interlude should be gritty and edge of your seat tense. Action-packed over here, action-packed in your interlude. All this kind of stuff. If you're writing a romance and you do some kind of interlude, there should be some kind of like little romantic vignette off to the side. I don't know, but they should be similar genre, similar themes, similar moods. And the final thing that your interlude needs to be is not advancing the story forward, right? Because if it does advance the story forward, then it's just a scene in your book. It's not an interlude, right? So an interlude must be its own little isolated pocket away from the rest of the story. And if you're gonna do it, lean into it and have fun with it. Just make sure that it's short and follows the rule of the theme. And you know, the last thing I would say is that it should focus on a character that's known in the series, right? So it's either one of the main characters off doing something, like the Al McVarish, the sigil agent, or it's someone like a Han Solo, where everyone knows who this person is, or a known side character, like from Mercy Thompson, right? Not that you can't write an interlude with a character that's unknown. You know, we've never seen this character on page before. He's not a side character. He or she is not a side character. They're not someone we've seen or mentioned before. Not that you can't do it. Of course you can. But I think there'd be a risk if you introduce some character in an interlude. You take your reader away from this, what they bought the book for, bring them over here, and this is someone they're not invested in. It can be done, but there's a risk there. So I would say the safer bet is to focus on either someone from the main character suite doing something, right, off to the side, or a known side character that readers like and maybe have a fandom around. All right, so interludes. It's neat. Check it out. If you've read any books with interludes in them, let me know in the comments. I'm curious because whenever I find one, I get kind of excited. I'm like, ooh, how are they going to do this interlude? Because now I'm reading books sort of with the eye of a writer, and I watch for this stuff. I'm like, how are they going to do this interlude? And it's very interesting to me because these are all storytelling techniques that I think are very, very interesting. I have yet to write an interlude myself, but I think it's definitely something I'm going to try. So if you like this video, please smush that like button, and as always, please subscribe. I post most Thursdays, and you can find me on a lot of social media platforms. I'm most active on Threads and Facebook these days, but all the links are below in the description. Be sure to check out The Unlife of Lisa Cooper and The Vampires of 1863. Those are my two urban fantasy novels. No interludes in them, but they're a great read. And check out jmchaylee.com for book information, character art. You can leave me a message, swing by and say hello. That about wraps it up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.